Hey, how's it going? I'm Fortuna, and in this video, I'm gonna share 7 pro tips that you can use with Simpler. Let's jump right into it. Tip number 1, tune your sample. Let's say you're working with a melodic instrument sample like this. Whether you're trying to create a melody or even chords with a sample like this, it can be a challenge when you don't know what pitch the sample is actually playing when you trigger it. This becomes really obvious when you play the same MIDI pattern with another instrument. To make this easier to work with, try retuning your sample. You can use the default tuner audio effect from Ableton Live, and then I'm also going to open up the Simpler so we can tweak the tuning. Now, play any note. I'm going to play C3 and check what note is actually being registered by the tuner. Then, just like a guitar, I'm going to adjust the transpose control until the note playing matches a C. And use the detune control if needed. That's it. Now when I play the sample, everything will be in tune with other synths and virtual instruments. Tip number 2, loop and fade. You can use the loop button in Simpler to loop a section of your sample. At first, it sounds like a simple repeat, but we can use the controls here to adjust which specific part of the sample is being looped. This is perfect for samples that have a unique beginning, but a more stable sustain in the middle. Depending on the sample, you might even find a perfect waveform cycle to loop to create a synth-like sustain. I'd recommend leaving the snap button enabled if you're planning to do this though. Often, this looping method introduces unnatural clicks and artifacts. So to fix that, we can use the fade control here to smooth out how the sample loops from end to end. Tip number 3, add glide to looped samples. Now, this is a quick one, but it's related to the last tip. If you're specifically working with a bass or melodic sample, try setting your voices to 1 and enabling glide in the control page. This will create a seamless glide when you play notes like this. You can create some great sliding patterns or even just make your own bass drops using simple MIDI notes. Tip number 4, map velocity to filter. By default, Simpler's amplitude envelope is set to respond to the note velocity. It's alright, but we can make this sound way more realistic and expressive by turning up the velocity amount in the filter section as well. Make sure you have the filter enabled and set to the low pass filter mode. Set this to 100% and turn down the filter frequency until you hear a difference between the low velocity and high velocity notes. Try creating a simple pattern like this or play with a MIDI controller so that you can test the response of your notes. This will really vary on a sound by sound basis, so use your ears and do what sounds right for your sample. Tip number 5, add pre-filter drive. Whenever you have a sample that's a bit thin, you might be tempted to throw on a saturator afterwards to give it more punch. However, by using the pre-filter drive, you can get a completely different sound that might even work better without introducing extra distortion. This can only be found by switching the filter circuit type. There are a few different types, but they all feature some kind of drive that we can turn up. Just keep in mind, this drive is being applied before the filter section in Simpler. That means you can still adjust the filter and even add automation without additional distortion after. Tip number 6, LFO Sample and Hold. This is another quick one. We can use the sample and hold to imitate the sound of analog drift or create percussion that's a bit more alive. By default, the LFO in Simpler is set to a sine wave, which is great when you need a bit of a vibrato or some filter wub-wubs, which, by the way, I highly recommend you try this. But if we switch the LFO type to sample and hold and set the rate to the minimum, we can randomize the pitch of the sample every time a new note is played. This works since we have retriggering enabled as well. And if you dial it in just a little bit, you can get some great variation with every note. This is one of my favorite tricks to use with percussion in particular. Tip number 7, use MPE. In Live 11, we can use note expression with MPE-compatible instruments such as Simpler to add some incredible amount of expression. By default though, only the MPE pitch bend is enabled to respond, but that's still a great option if you're working with melodic instrument samples. And just like with some of the other tricks that I mentioned earlier, this works great after setting the loop and fade in your sample. As a bonus, if you're familiar with Sampler, you can flip Simpler into Sampler, assign the slide and pressure controls to something more meaningful, like filter cutoff and volume, to add some extra expression. And that's it for now. There are a ton of other tricks that we can do with Simpler, but I'll save those for another video. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you learned something new, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And if you like freebies, I have some instruments and effect racks that are free to download right now, links in the description. Until next time, see you in the loop.